Hello and welcome to an overview of this week's NewsNow magazine. With me is Pieter-Louis Myburgh, a journalist at NewsNow. Hi Pieter-Louis.
Morning.
And Jerusha Sukhdeo.
Morning.
Jerusha, hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Very well, thank you. We're talking about race this week. Our issue interviewed, in this issue we interviewed several prominent South Africans on the issue of race. In the news lately, for many, many reasons, extreme examples of racism at Virgin Active, two branches of Virgin Active acted against members who acted in a racist fashion, and in Parliament also in the last week, Pieter Mulder of the Freedom Front Plus said some very controversial things about land ownership, which touched on this issue of race. Both of you interviewed some prominent people about whether they've been affected by racism. What did they say? Jerusha, who did you speak to?
I actually was very lucky. I got to speak to Rita Bezelihout, and you know, in addition to being hilarious, she made some really, really good points. And I think the biggest thing that she said was people like to make general dislike a race issue. So if you don't like somebody because of a certain thing they're doing, you immediately say, oh, it's because they're white, or oh, it's because they're black, they always do this. When really you don't like them being stupid, or you don't like the fact that they're a bad driver. So her overarching thing was that we take these things that we don't like and we make it about race.
So Pieter Mulder is a comedian, but she's been, you know, she was very involved in the 80s also in making people aware of the evils of apartheid. Does she believe, as a comedian or a person, that racism is a problem?
Absolutely. I mean, she doesn't deny the existence of racism at all, and she doesn't say that it's not a problem in our society. She just seems to think that we make ourselves so self-important by making race such a big issue where it really doesn't have to be.
Pieter-Louis, who did you speak to?
I spoke to Corin Zoid, the rock star, and you know what was very refreshing about her interview to me was that there wasn't an immediate denial about the issue, that there is racism in South Africa, and that even that she's experienced prejudice from her side herself before, and probably dished it out on a couple of occasions too. She admitted it's a problem, but she also said it's something that needs to be addressed inside all of us, probably in South Africa.
There was an incident this week in Parliament which didn't invite many chuckles at all. In fact, howls of dissent from most other benches, ANC benches. Pieter Mulder saying that, as he called it, Bantu South Africans don't have any claim to 40% of South Africa's land because they didn't inhabit it way back. The president rebuked him quite strongly. Pieter-Louis, what is your take? There have been calls for Pieter Mulder to go. What do you think?
Yes, I'd see the Young Communist League of South Africa actually, they were the first source that actually called for his head to roll. It doesn't look like it's going to happen at this stage. Zuma doing his typical slap on the wrist kind of thing. I do think, yeah, it's a very controversial thing to say, especially in Parliament, and the issue of land reform is a very touchy one, so I think it was a bit of a harsh approach to take from his side.
Of course, the reason for restitution is to correct the wrongs of the 1913 Land Act, and the point is not to go and look at who exactly owned what. Jerusha, he says he's not stepping down. He has been in an awkward position for a while because he's both the leader of an opposition party with very different policies to the ANC and a deputy minister. Is that tenable?
It's a really, really tricky one, and actually Waldimar said something very interesting. And quite predictable actually. He said, such utterances are nothing but archaic white denialism, and it will defeat the very process of land distribution and land restitution. So, you know, I think that he's obviously coming from a very specific standpoint, but it's true. I mean, nobody's denying the fact that we're all migrants in South Africa. We all came from a different place. But, you know, what Mulder's saying is a little bit dodgy.
One could say that. One could say that. Let's see what happens there. A completely unrelated story that we picked up this week is a Swiss invention planned to vacuum up some of the junk in space. Pieter-Louis.
Yes, yeah, we're looking at the 90 million rand Clean Space One. Right. It's a device that acts like a massive vacuum cleaner, goes up, launches into orbit, and it sweeps up pieces of space debris, which usually is left behind by space projects, defunct satellites, that kind of thing. So it's a step in the right direction for cleaning up, you know, the space and orbit around Earth.
The Swiss have never liked junk very much, known for clean and expensive cities. Jerusha, why is it such a problem?
Well,
space junk.
Isn't this just kind of typical of human beings, that we litter our own planet and then we litter space, you know, so we take stuff up there and we just leave it there. It's actually a huge problem because apparently what's happening is we've got other crafts orbiting in space, and so there's these pieces of junk floating around, and then they hit and they collide with one another. And when that collision happens, it not only damages the actual spacecraft, but it creates more junk in space.
So how did the debris end up there? Are these parts of broken up satellites, or what does it actually consist of?
It's broken up satellites, pieces of rocket ships that have broken off. It's actually quite Star Wars-ish, you know, everything that's up in space is decaying and it's just floating around our planet.
And this is an expensive project. Who will pay for it? The Swiss? Is it a private run?
Do you know what, at this stage, the Swiss are paying for it. They're developing the first batch of the prototype. But after that, once it actually goes into production, they're going to sell it to different countries. And one of their potential clients would be China, who recently blew up a satellite in space. And that defunct satellite now is 150,000 pieces of debris circling Earth.
Let's send the bill to the Chinese maybe directly. So last story that we're talking about this week is police brutality. There was an incident in Soweto recently, Jerusha, of a teenager being shot dead by police. He was buried this weekend.
Yes, yeah. It was absolutely horrific. And the sad thing is he was so young. And as parents, you know, parents teach children that when you're in a pickle, you find a policeman. You know, those are the people who are going to help you. And more people are teaching their children, stay away from policemen. They can't be trusted.
So if you can afford it, who will you call? Who will you call first if somebody breaks into your house?
Before
private security or the police before Ghostbusters?
Yeah, I think probably the private security company.
Pieter-Louis?
No, it's very sad to say, but probably the same.
Why?
It's just all these negative messages we kind of reading about policemen in the newspapers, and they're traditionally the first source of trust you should have, but it looks like they're transgressing on that.
Well, it's interesting. We went onto the streets to find out what you think about police brutality and whether you would call the police or private security if something happens to you. Thank you for watching.
I think I'd call the private security firm basically just because they in my nose.
Private security firm.
For me as well.
They are faster than the police.
Police are becoming less and less credible.
They never on time.
I do feel safe with the police, but I feel much safer with the private security.